In response to unjust civil rights and corruption in the government, student and worker riots broke out in May 1968 in Paris, France, in hopes of turning around these problems and gaining back rights. The fast-growing student population fought for better university conditions, while 9 million workers fought to win better pay. Although never fully reaching these goals, these riots were able to cause change, influence, and spark the beginning of much political reform in France today. Aside from fighting for rights, the French also protested many wars that occurred during the 20th century. The Vietnam War was protested by many students prior to the May 1968 riots. Another huge disruption was also caused by World War II. Because of so much destruction that was included in the aftermath of World War I, World War I was by far one of the bloodiest wars the world had ever seen. The French called it the last of the last in hopes that a war so violent wouldn't repeat itself. However, that was proven wrong with World War II. After World War II, the French became disgusted with authority and sought political reform. The French wanted to abolish the hierarchy, bureaucracy, over-centralization, and entrenched privilege that controlled the government. They wanted something more democratic. Since the May 1968 riots also occurred during the 60s and early 70s hippie movement, the revolts against authority were also against authority in the family, along much more generational lines.
I guess what was hard is before that there were set rules. As a child you were obeying your parents and they were telling you what to do and you pretty much followed rules. After that we didn't have rules anymore and that was very hard. There was a lot more conflicts with the family because they were still expecting us to obey their authority, but we felt now empowered, and so we didn't feel we were. And so that's, I think, where the shift was.
Since much of France was in a state of change, the younger generations of France wanted change in family structure and independence from their family's authority. As the riots began, the country was paralyzed, the government powerless, and the trade unions had lost control of the situation. As soon as the riots broke out, all bottled resentment against authoritarianism in the family, as well as in the government, was able to surface. Resentment against elitism in society and its manifestations in secondary and higher education, against overcrowded and inadequately resourced teaching facilities, and against inequality, injustice, and the insecurity bred by rapid social change. The riots had begun with the student body of Nanterre University. While youth revolts such as these became general in the West, from anti-Vietnam protests in the United States to Rolling Stones in swinging London, and finally the Baader Meinhof gang in West Germany, the riots caused by France's baby boom generation came closest to a real political revolution, with 10 million workers on strike, and not just a revulsion against stifling social rules of class, education, and sexual behavior. The severity of the student revolts at the University of Nanterre resulted in the university being shut down temporarily. Soon, these riots spread from the campus in Nanterre to Sorbonne in central Paris. Students were then joined by the 9 million workers and thousands of other rioters fighting for their share of equality in society. Riots with police involvement went on for days and nights. Rioters ripped apart the streets and threw cobblestones, while the police fought back with tear gas. Although the incident itself is relatively insignificant, the disciplinary measures instigated against the students, as well as the repeated interventions by police, escalated the conflicts and to make Nanterre the starting point of a movement that quickly spreads to university and high schools throughout the country. In order to cease the riots, de Gaulle proposed a referendum in order to bring about reform in the Fifth Republic. If the referendum passed, it would appoint more autonomy in universities, along with the granting of a better legal status to trade unions inside firms. If the referendum failed, de Gaulle claimed he would resign. These riots didn't lead to the beginning of socialism. However, they continued the growth of popularity in socialist movements and views. For the entire generation of former Marxists, Maoists, Trotskyites, and rebels who were now comfortably added in journalism, politics, teaching, and the arts, it was a personal watershed. Despite the revolts having appeared to achieve very little, many French now believe it quickened the modernization of French politics and society. Although the revolts failed to achieve their objectives, May 1968, in many subtle ways, was widely influential, and many people today in France still regard it as a watershed. However, many riots still continue in France today. The French people continue to push for even more political reform, while students continue to fight to not lose rights they've already fought for. Today, the French continue their series of revolutions, except it's now no longer for change. Today, they continue to fight for their government and society to remain the same after so many years of fighting for change.